Just very briefly, by way of introduction, the session this afternoon is all about the Infor ION suite, which is, as most of you will probably know, a new function or set of functions that's available with the latest version of Sun Systems, which I'm pleased to say is now called Sun Systems 6. So there's no Infor 10 terminology there anymore. We just call it Sun Systems 6. So what we'll do is go through a couple of slides just to set the scene and describe what the ION toolkit is all about, and then we'll spend as much time as we can going through the actual software itself and showing you some practical examples of how this can be used in your businesses. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jamie, who will set the scene, and then we'll go from there.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining this webinar. So I've met many of you before, and I know some of the time we've spoken about Infor ION. And what we want to do today is just to help give you a clear understanding of, firstly, really what ION Suite is going to give you now and what your abilities are, and also what you can take forward into the future as well, what abilities are going to be keep on giving and giving as we progress. So ION itself stands for Intelligent Open Networks, and I think the open in that is really relevant here, really important, because it's not just about thinking of Sun Systems in isolation and Sun Systems being the only part of your business, but really leveraging the ability to use Sun Systems in conjunction with other applications, having it bring the work to you, and really it's about that interconnectivity. So what I'm going to do initially is take you through the primary elements of ION, and then after that I'm going to hand over to Mark Anderson, who's going to take you through an actual demonstration of using the software itself, before we can move on to any questions and answers. So looking at the ION suite, pretty much we still see Sun Systems being the centre of our world. I mean, for all of us, this is our primary application. It's the backbone of our business, so it still forms the core part of anything we do. And ION is really enhancing that or taking it one step further. You can see from my my diagram there that we've got three primary elements to the ION suite, and we'll talk about each of those in turn. So initially, we'll look at the ION Connect element. So ION Connect, just as the slide says, really, it really does establish connection flows between applications, but whereas in the past that has required quite bespoke integration work, where there's been a fairly hefty overhead every time you upgrade, the real benefit that ION Connect gives you is it gives you plug-and-play connectivity to a lot of applications straight out of the box. It also offers you connectivity to third-party and legacy applications, but it means that it's been done to a predefined standard, and that gives us the ability so that when we upgrade Sun Systems in the future, we don't have to go through a heavy integration process with working out how it's actually going to work with the new system. It'll just be a case of upgrading Sun Systems, and with the ION connectability, it will just plug straight in and start flowing again. So if we look at the screenshot we've got here, the slide we've got here, we've got a number of Connect abilities that are straight out of the box as we speak today. Specifically, as you would expect, we've got the Infor app connector, which we're connected to Sun Systems, but we've also got connections to the XM expense management package, to Infor Motion, and I'll come on to more about that in a little while, and to the Infor Cloud Suite. So there's integration here straight out of the box, no integration work required for that. But that doesn't mean to say that your third-party or your legacy applications that are left behind. It's actually possible to connect ION straight to a database using the DB connector, and even to text files. And that's also not including any IBM systems with using the JMS connection standard. So those ones there. Moving along, we've got the business adapters as well. So we offer connectivity to the Salesforce.com portal. So I know many people are using Salesforce now, and that connects straight into it again, but also SAP and MS Dynamics CRM. So if you're using those for your customer relationship management package, you can connect those into the ION Connect backbone as well. So it's quite difficult sometimes to kind of visualize just what is ION Connect and how does it actually work. So I've got this slide here now that kind of tries to give us really a visual representation of just what's happening with ION. And I guess in terms of data flowing around the system, if we think of the data being messages, if we look here, we've got a message now that gets passed into our system, and it could be from Sun Systems or it could be from any of the other applications at the top there. So if we have a message that comes from Infor Sun Systems, for example, a new supplier account being created, we might want that to go straight into our asset management system so that we can start ordering spare parts from that particular supplier. So by plugging in Sun Systems and Infor EAM, that message file or business object will get passed straight through from Sun Systems to the EAM application without any custom integration work. You won't have to go in and start defining custom settings. It will know where to actually put that supplier account. But this works bi-directional, so any of the applications we're also plugging into the ION backbone also will publish out to Sun Systems if that's what you required. But we're not just talking about actually publishing data to Sun Systems as well. If you look on the left-hand side of your slide there, we've got tasks, alerts, and escalations. So we'll be coming on to a minute just talk just about ION workflow and ION event management. So those facilities can also receive the messages. And on the right-hand side here, we have what is a representation of a tablet device or an iPhone. So if you're traveling to a meeting or you're out, even if you're on holiday and you want to take the work with you, if a new supplier account requires approval or we've got a new employee account requires approval before it can go to Sun Systems, this actually can be brought to you so you can receive a notification on your iPhone, for example, using the standard notification functionality, and you'll be able to approve or reject that straight from there. So it's about you not having to actually go and proactively look for these approvals and work through them one by one, but actually having them come to you. Of course, those messages can be defined, so you don't have to necessarily receive every message. You can just approve those ones that are relevant to you. Okay, so moving on from the ION Connect element of our application, I think the one that would make quite a big impact to people initially would be the ION event management. So this will monitor for us business events based on predefined rules. So that means that, for example, here if we've got a new supplier code being set up as we had in that previous ION element, it may be the case that you want a particular department to know about that new account code being set up. So these new account codes can be pushed to the relevant department to actually help to keep an eye out on what's happening within your business. So these events can actually come out to sorry,
that's okay. Yeah, so what Jamie was saying is that effectively what's happening is there's an event occurring in your business application, in this case Sun Systems, and that, as a result of that event, basically a message is being pushed into ION, and then on the back of that event being published to ION, in this case, the event management tool is then notifying people of that event. So rather than pass it to another business application, it's basically doling out a notification of the event. And the notification can either be an email or, as you can just about see here, but we'll see in more detail later, if you like, a message being pushed in what I would call a Twitter-like format out to users.
That's absolutely right. And it's almost like as you see here with this activity deck that we'll see later, it's like a mission control. So this is optional. You don't have to be sitting with this published out on your desktop all day, but you can have it minimized or just bring up when you want to be looking out for those new events. And it can be filtered, so it might be just the case that you want to know when there's a new cost center being created within the analysis codes. You don't have to be getting notifications all day long for any new analysis codes full stop. It can just be for those particular ones that you want to filter, or maybe even new chart of account codes or currency rates. However, don't think this just for reference data. You can also actually be notified for account balance movements and for particular journal entry types that take place. So, for example, if you have a bank account and you want to monitor that the balance doesn't go below a certain value, then the ION Event Management can proactively monitor that and bring that notification to you. So okay, so moving along here, you'll see that on the right-hand side of this slide that we've got here, we've got the ION activity list. So whilst that activity list that I've got on my deck here has every type of event, if I just particularly care about chart of account codes or analysis codes, I can move those into their individual columns. So to the left-hand side here, and as Mark will show you later, you can filter that content to just see those items that are relevant to you at that particular time. Activity Deck is also available for the iPhone and the iPad, which uses Apple's inbuilt notifications to push alerts directly to you. And if you don't have one of those devices, it can also email you, so it can email to an individual, possibly even a group or a whole distribution list such as finance. So I'm moving on from the event management element. We're going to move along here to the ION workflow suite. So ION workflow can notify you when one or more users when a task requires attention. So by that what I mean is we could have one task taking place here, and it can be a whole group of people that actually get notified. It doesn't have to be just one person trying to keep on top of everything. ION workflow allows the monitoring of ledger entry, so you can monitor journals, and it also allows the control of those ledger entry journals. So we can have a filter here, so a particular type of journal or a particular value of a journal has to get approval prior to entry or to commitment to the ledger. Obviously you wouldn't necessarily want to approve every journal, but these workflows can be set up with filters so that it can be journals that meet a particular criteria, such as a particular value in excess of, or to a particular account. Also extremely useful, you can actually now set up the approval control over payment runs. So if you want to have the final stage of a payment run being that a particular member of staff has to approve it, then you can use workflow to control that. But rather than them particularly proactively looking for it, it will notify them by email or by notification that there's a payment run ready to be approved. And the same thing also for allocation markers and purchase orders. So if you find, and I have seen this myself as well, that people using the wrong allocation markers in the wrong context, you could set up approval, for example, on reconciliation or correction markers to stop people using those without appropriate approval. The good thing about this as well is it's all audited. So if we want to look back and actually see who approved a particular journal, that is stamped along with a timestamp, so that can be investigated. They can also be filtered or directed as you require. So different types of journal approval can be filtered to different groups of users. The configuration for these workflows is via a visual user interface, and you can build up workflows using what's known as BPMN. Now, not want to get too technical, it's just really an industry standard for diagramming business processes. And you can almost see a mini one of it at the bottom of the screen here. So we've got a very simple approval process where it goes through an IT level of approval, so it's a particular journal type that's going to affect some IT expenditure accounts. If IT approve it, then a journal gets notified to the user and carries on. But these can be as simple as that, or they can be as complex as you require. Again, the approvals don't have to be via this activity deck. It can also be via iPhone, iPad, or email. Currently, at the moment as well, there are more approval processes in development, so we're looking in the future to start seeing approval processes for all the different elements within Sun Systems as well. So that's quite a few of the slides. Obviously, I don't want to get too heavy on the slides. I think what's really key is to have a look at the software in action. So I'm going to hand over now to Mark. So just be a slight flicker whilst we change from PowerPoint to the Sun Systems image.
Right. Good afternoon. As Jamie said, I'm going to show you sort of, if you like, some of the software in operation. Now, Jamie highlighted sort of, if you like, three aspects of ION: connect, the workflow, and the notifications. In effect, I'm only going to really show you the workflow and the notifications, and that's simply because, as if you like, as the plumbing, connect is more sort of it's sort of there. It's not anything that's terribly visible, but I will talk a little bit about what's going on in the middleware piece. So many of you will have seen this before. What we're looking at is Sun Systems 6 sitting in the workspace environment. So over on the left here I've got my applications, and over on the right here I've got my web parts, my sort of mini applications. And the mini application that I've got expanded for this purpose is what's called Pulse Desk. Let me just get rid of this one. And the reason I've got this open is because basically as I do a few things in the system, I want to see them come through live. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a couple of relatively minor changes to my system, but they're the sort of changes that somebody somewhere else in the organization might just care about me doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new account. And we'll give it a slightly dodgy name. So this is the sort of thing that somebody might do in the system, but you as the CFO or a financial controller might just be interested that people are, in quotes, messing with the chartered accounts. Even when people have the rights to, sometimes you want somebody else to be able to witness it. So effectively what's happened is I've created this account in the system. The Sun Systems connector has basically published that event out to the world, and any application that cares to listen to that event can then take other applications. So it could be something like another business system setting up a supplier to match this one, or it could be something going into a reporting business data warehouse or whatever. In this case, the only thing I've got hanging off the back, because I wanted to keep it simple, is a notification. So all that's happening is when this is created, there's a notification going out, in fact, to me and, in fact, to Jamie as well. And you can see that today, because the little panel we've got set up here is showing me events grouped by period, by date, and we'll look at the bigger version of this client in a moment. So it's now telling me a new chartered accounts record has been created. It's telling me the account code, the name, the type, and the business unit it was created in. And that message there, and we'll look at the setup, is actually customizable. So I could have included who did it. I could have included, well, I've got a rough timestamp of it anyway, but I could include the audit timestamp from Sun Systems. So you can make these as specific as you need them to be for your business. So that's one. And I'm just going to quickly I'm just going to set up a cost center code as well. Can't spell. So again, that's another new record created. And although I'm doing it on a couple of reference data, it could be something as obvious as a transaction being posted to a suspense account. As Jamie said, it could be, although it would be kind of a time-based alert, it could be checking that the balance on the account hasn't fallen above or below a particular number. You can also do things like send a notification on a Friday at 3 p.m. if there hasn't been a payment run created in the last 2 days. So you can not only monitor things that have happened, you can also potentially monitor things that haven't happened that you expected to happen. We just have to wait for this to come through. As you see, it's pretty close to real time, deliberately, but however, real time feels a little dragged when we're all sitting here staring at it. So you'll notice the other thing is to be aware of is you can put filters in these things. So although it's actually potentially publishing every new analysis code, I might have chosen to only trigger an alert when it's cost center because perhaps I don't care about project because we've got potentially hundreds of those being created a day. So it's simply not worth monitoring. But if we look back while we're waiting for that, you can see things like I've got a new cost center there, another new chartered accounts code there, dating back over some period. And you can in fact keep these notifications as long as you like. You can also, if you'll notice, if I just expand this one from today while we're waiting for G to load, you can also mark them as done. And in fact, you can also set, if you like, reminders based on the notifications not being acknowledged. So you can go as far as saying, you know, a bit like a snooze on an alarm clock. I'm going to tell you when a cost center is set up, and if you don't acknowledge that I told you within a day, I'll remind you again. So you can get quite specific about this. This is going to take time. I'll press on, and I'm sure it'll show up in a minute. So that's really alerting. We'll talk a little bit more. We'll look at the alerts again in a slightly bigger format. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a journal into the system. And in this case, pardon my typing, what I've got set up on the journaling is not a notification, but I've actually got a workflow set up on this journal type. So what's going to happen is when I stick the journal in, rather than it actually post, it's going to get picked up by the workflow, and it's going to get, in effect, parked, and then there will be some external routing kicks in, and that will be pushed around the organisation. In this case, nowhere very exciting, but just Jamie and I again, for us to approve its posting. So that's that in, and let's post it. Those of you using sort of 5.3, 5.4 and beyond may recognise that this is sort of linked into the authorization process in some systems. And off we go. So that's gone out for authorization. So, as I said, that's the small version of the Pulse desk. Yeah, that's good. It skipped, and you can see that it's now popped the workflow message through. Let's have a look at the big version of the product. So, as Jamie said as well, remember that I'm looking at Pulse Desk here on the PC, and specifically I'm looking at it inside Workspace. It can be run as a standalone web client. There are also clients available for it for the iPad and the iPhone, and it can also be configured to send emails as well. So the only reason I'm really showing it in the desktop is because it keeps us inside the product, whereas showing emails in Outlook is, well, you know, it's an email in Outlook. So you'll see here, just before we talk about the workflow, that what I've done is I've set my notifications, and here I've got the filtering set up. So I've got a single column with everything in, so that's all of my notifications and workflows and stuff set in the system. And then over here, I've got that filtered to only show me JavaScript accounts related changes, and over here I've got it set to only show analysis level changes. So you can build these to be as filtered as you need them to be to make sense based on the sort of volumes of stuff you're going to get. So if I just highlight the approval message that's come through, and I open the activity locator, what you actually get is a little view of the workflow that journal is flowing through. So what I will do is I'm just going to assign that to me, which is to say I take ownership of it, and then I'm going to say OK. And then if I refresh this at the bottom, you can actually see that it's basically stepped through the workflow. It's now authorized. And what will happen is the message will now flow back to Sun Systems, and that will actually be posted into the ledger and assigned a journal number, etc. So you can see it gives you, a proper workflow around journal posting. So in a sense, that's it in operation, and it's mostly designed to be quite, if you like, simplistic in its implementation in terms of the way people use it outside. Let's have a little bit of a quick look. It will only be a quick look at how this is set up. But let's do it there.
And I think some great real-world uses of this would be having workflows on those particular journal types that are more sensitive, so posting to sensitive accounts, big amounts, or even like year-end adjustment type journals. I think I'd want to have control of those, and I'd also like to be notified when people set up new cost centers like affect me, or even maybe when people have new expense accounts, because I want to monitor the creation of new expense accounts.
I mean, increasingly we see in sophisticated customers people like a CFO who isn't going to spend a lot of time, or a financial controller who isn't going to actually spend a lot of time in the application, but does want a kind of dashboard level notification of key structural changes to the underlying data. So what we've got here is, and I'm not going to show you the whole tool, but this is basically a thing called ION Desk, which is the, if you like, the administrative interface for the various elements of ION. So the first one I'm going to look at is event management. And what we've got here is a list of the event management profiles that we've set up. And you can see some examples here of the sort of thing we can create. So we could perhaps look at particular notifications when a nominal ledger account is created, or when it's closed, or when there's a journal posted in a specific account, or when it's posted to a suspense account, or when a new dimension's added, or when currency rates are updated. The one that we ran earlier is that one. So let's have a quick look at that. So what we're doing is we're listening for chart of accounts messages. So, in jargon, that's basically let me know this is the underlying message. And the reason it's not called, you'll see with some of them they're not called what they are in some systems, is because this product set sits across the whole Infor application suite. We're basically pulling out of that a number of key bits of information, so things like the name of the chart or the name of the account code, the account code itself, what type it is, which accounting entity it's in, and I could also, as I say, pick out user and stuff. We're then setting up, testing the individual conditions, so we're basically testing, in this case, when an account is created. We're then setting up the content of the alert. So you can see here, this is the message text we were getting, a new chart of accounts record has been created, and we've got little square brackets in there adding in those properties we're taking from the particular message, which give us the individual context. And we're also setting up the distribution. So you can see here, I've just said when this happens, send it to Jamie and I, and send us an email as well. So, it's relatively easy to set up. And we've also got escalation. So, as I said, if nobody takes ownership of this within the day, we can nudge somebody else, or we could remind those people, and we can continue to escalate it. It depends on the message. Some messages, but something like posting to a suspense account, perhaps if somebody hasn't acknowledged they've dealt with it in a couple of days, you want to let somebody else know. So that's, if you like, those monitoring, and you'll see on an individual basis they can be activated and deactivated. So you can you could, in theory at least, if you wanted to, turn some of them on for only part of the month. Perhaps when, if they were on for the whole month, they'd be a bit busy, but around here month end, you might want to just test things being posted from the previous period, just to make sure that your management accounts aren't moving from under you. So there's plenty of flexibility within those models. Now I'm just going to have a quick look at the workflow model. And again, the difference between workflow and notifications in some ways is quite subtle, because as we've already seen with notifications, you can put escalations and stuff on them. The real difference is that a workflow assumes the putting back of data into some systems, whereas the alert is more sort of a push notification, then subsequent, if you like, reminding of that notification. Workflow is a round trip. It comes out, it goes back in. So if we look at the journal authorization, our example is a relatively simple one. So as James said, we've got some very simple tests in here and very simple messages. So we're doing a very simple test here to see if the journal type, if it's a particular journal type. If it is, we're routing it through for authorization with a message. And again, the distribution is to Jamie and I. And again, we've got escalation here. So again, if Jamie or I didn't approve that within N number of days, it can be escalated to somebody else for action. But you'll see if you look over on the left here, there's actually a full set of things like you can link these workflows to things like decision tables, notification criteria. You can also do things like parallel processing, so send it out to two people and get those two individually to say yes before it will progress on to the next step. So that's a relatively simple one, just for the sake of it. Although don't ask me to explain it all. This is a less simple one, and you can see there's many more steps in the workflow, and there's even a parallel section there, which is indeed going to route things through 3 different paths, and then resynchronize and wait for all 3 paths to complete before it progresses. So you can get very complicated with these things, though I suspect most people would need nothing like that in the early days. This toolset also provides full monitoring, so you can see if there are any errors, and you can test where messages are in the queue. So you've got a full management console, if you like, for monitoring the what's going on in the ION environment. So I think that's probably all I particularly wanted to show of the product. I say in some ways it is a fairly light product in use, because people see fairly short messages. And it's designed to be pretty low impact and pretty intuitive for people to use. They don't see too much of it.